Welcome to She Lives in the Leaves, a panel about the chart-topping, bone-chilling comic book series, The Autumnal. I'm Adrian Wassel, editor-in-chief of Vault Comics and our dedicated horror imprint, Nightfall. I'm joined today by Syndee Barwick and David Dissanayake, as well as Alex Scola. If you're looking to connect and learn more about Vault and Nightfall, they hold all the answers. I'm also joined by Daniel Kraus and Chris Shehan, creators of The Autumnal. The Autumnal number 8 hits shelves next month, concluding the story, and then all the oversized issues will be collected into a gigantic, hauntingly beautiful trade paperback collection that releases September 7th. So I figured I'd kick things off by giving Daniel and Chris an opportunity to do quick introductions, and then I've got some questions queued up for you guys. Daniel, want to take it away?
Sure. I'm happy to be here and see all of you. So I'm a writer. That probably is not surprising. Mostly novels. I've published maybe like 12 or so novels. Autumnal is my first comic book. My novels sort of range from all the way down to middle school to adult. So I really kind of run the gamut. I guess I haven't technically done picture books yet for like toddlers, but I'll get there eventually. I'm probably most well known for my collaborations. I've done a couple with Guillermo del Toro and one with George Romero, but I've done plenty of stuff on my own as well. And that's me.
Great. Chris, could you do a quick little intro?
I'm an artist. I've always drawn all my life, and I've always wanted to tell stories, and I found comics as kind of a perfect fit for me. I found comics late in my life. I didn't actually start reading comics until I was 18, but around that time I knew I wanted to do something with illustration and something with storytelling, and I got into film a little bit and animation, and I just kept settling back into comics, and it's just kind of a perfect medium for me, and I really love it. And so here I am.
Excellent. Well, I think those intros sort of touched on one of the first questions I wanted to ask. So Daniel, you mentioned this is your first foray into comics, and I wanted to know why the Autumnal had to be a comic book. What about this story was made you think, okay, this is it. This is the one I have to tell, and I want to do it as a comic?
It's really visuals. A lot of my stuff kind of has, cinematic type of feel to it. But this was so colorful. Like whenever I envisioned it with the autumn leaves, it always felt like, all right, this either has to be some sort of film project or a comic or something where I can express the colors. And so much of it is, we can talk about inspirations later if you want, but so much of it is inspired by The Wicker Man, which is one of my favorite movies. And, again, it's just something that I think works in my head visually rather than prose. So that was basically the gist of it. And on top of all that, I like to stretch out. Obviously, I'm writing for various age groups, but I also, I'm constantly itching to try new kind of formats and styles. And so I was, for a couple years, had just been filtering all my ideas through a potential comic book filter, like which one of these kernels of an idea would be an in route into doing something in comics. And this one just immediately felt right. All my ideas take years to develop, but once I figured it out, I just thought comics all the way.
And as a quick follow-up there, in terms of process for you writing, how different, sorry, I have a very loud beeping going on in my headphones. How different was the process between, say, an approach to a novel and the approach to the autumnal? Was it similar, dissimilar?
The process of, I did all the scripts up front. I did all 8 scripts at once. So the process of organizing the story wasn't so different. You know, I was doing front to back, revising all 8 when I did my revision. So there wasn't a sense that, you know, I make a decision in the episode or in issue 7, and I wish I could have fixed something in issue 1. It was all done in a novelistic chunk. But the process, and of course this is obvious to anyone who regularly writes comics, the process is much more puzzle-like, which I found very pleasing. You know, in a novel, you're never obviously thinking about what's on what page. I mean, it's a ludicrous thought. But the idea of having to come up with something satisfying on a page and on a spread, on a page turn, and fitting your thoughts into those little modular chunks. And then when you make a revision, all that gets screwed up and you have to remodulate everything. That was a really cool, unique puzzle that I just found really, really fun.
I've always described comic book making like one of those slide puzzles that you have as a kid, where it's like a picture of a duck on like 6 tiles and 1 tile's missing. Yeah. And you have to like slide them around. You know, it's supposed to look like a duck or whatever. Yeah. And you have to slide it around to get it to look like that. That I feel like that's the best metaphor for comic book making. You're like, I know this needs to be a duck, but how do I move the panels to do it? Which tees up you, Chris, perfectly, because that's ultimately you're the one doing all of that decision making, from the script to the, you know, to the actual page. And one bit of feedback that I think we've all heard numerous times about the autumnal is how intense the atmosphere of this book is. People have called it a slow burn, more novelistic than most horror comics, no surprise. And that the atmosphere is just sort of oppressive, but also somehow weirdly enticing and charming, and people can't wait to get back into that next issue. And so what I wanted to ask you about is in a story like this, where the scares are so often subtle and the monster isn't seen immediately from, you know, the first issue, how did you go about approaching creating that atmosphere? What were the decisions that you made, the influences, that kind of process that allowed you to create this atmosphere, this environment, this town of Comfort Notch that everyone who reads it feels stuck in, just like our main characters?
I've always liked those horror movies where the monster or whatever is there like all the time and you don't really realize it. Either it's the horror comes from the tension or from maybe you see like a shape in the background that's kind of uneasy. And I think with this, the horror comes from just everything, the people in the town, the way that Cat and Sybil react to the town and to the people, just uncomfortable. You know, the mayor is too friendly, and it's like suspicious, and sometimes people are too friendly and sometimes they're a bit too intense, and there's no in between. And so it's just this constant like discomfort, you know, ironically. And for me, I like, you know, just creepy looming shapes and just dark corners of the page, of the environment of the house, whatever, that there's nothing there. It's just shapes and it's just, you know, darkness. It's just ink. But people, like for me anyway, I like to look for things in the shadows. And one of my favorite movies of all time is Alien, and there's the one scene where you see the full-size xenomorph for the first time, but you don't really notice it on your first watch. It's hanging in the chains, and you barely see the shape of it. And I always love that. I think that's terrifying, and I think that's horror done right. And so I like everything is just kind of always around, and it's always uncomfortable and you don't really know why. So I try to give that feel to the best of my ability.
I as you were talking, I could just sort of pull panels from the autumnal that you've drawn in my mind that were just kind of like highlighting all of these things you were saying, the dark corner in the library, the way the branches seem to always be hanging just a little too low, reaching a little too close. Even just like some of the nighttime scenes in the rain, the way that you've used like the sort of lighting around lamps to kind of obfuscate what you ought to be able to see a little bit further past it. It kind of closes everyone in. The other thing about your art that is phenomenal is the character work. Kat and Sybil, our two main characters, have just such real physicality and emotionality on the page. And I've seen you kind of messing around with some cool tools here and there on Twitter and posting about it, and just doing those sort of explorations of character. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about making them real, taking two characters that exist only in words and then creating them as forms and making them sort of people that exist in our heads visually. And just talk a little bit about your process there and what tools you've used to give Kat and Sybil, you know, bring them to life.
The main thing for that, I like to film, because I used to make movies, and it comes a little more natural to me. Like I made movies for fun, nothing serious, but I like to act, and I get my girlfriend to also act, and I kind of direct her in front of a camera. And we don't just, like, a lot of people take photos for reference, and we like to film everything out. It takes a little more time, but what you get in that are little subtle expressions that you wouldn't have thought of if you were just posing for a photo. Like if you want to show somebody is scared and you just pose like, there's a difference between just like the taking in that picture and like like moving all around. And what I can get from that is I can scroll through the video and catch little things like a slight little twitch of like an eyebrow, or like a nostril flex in just like one moment. And in that instance, that's everything that I need. And I wouldn't have caught that otherwise. So I direct myself, and I direct my girlfriend when she is able to help me in front of the camera, and we act out these scenes, and we try to, especially for like a lot of the close-ups, I do a lot of close-ups because I like to really just show emotion. And I don't think I'm the best at it, but I think that's something that I aim
I can
for.
disagree that you're certainly up there. You are one of the best.
I appreciate it. It's definitely something I aim for. It's something I care about, is the character emotion. A lot of like older comics, all the shots look cool and they're beautifully rendered, but the characters are kind of stoic, and part of that is just limited ability to use reference back in the day using just.
I think Chris froze.
Chris, I think you've frozen, which is unfortunate, but hopefully Chris comes back. This sort of thing happens. So while we're waiting for Chris's internet to pick up and run again, I'll shift things back to Daniel. So you mentioned briefly the Wicker Man as your, direct influence, and I thought maybe you could talk a little bit more about that influence, about folk horror, and how you constructed Comfort Notch as a place in your head, and also who Kat and Sybil are, because I think as characters, how they interact is quite different than what I've seen sort of placed into, say, something like The Wicker Man, where you have like the sort of the kind of quintessential male lead. Here we have, I would say, a much more internal story between Kat and Sybil playing out, and a much more emotionally resonant, for me, story playing out with them. So thought I would ask you about that, the influences that brought you to the sort of folk horror of the town, and also Kat and Sybil as characters.
Well, as I've gotten older, I feel like I maybe grew up in folk horror. I mean, nothing terrible happened to me in that sense as a kid, but I grew up and lived in small towns in the Midwest in Iowa, and it's hard to appreciate it when you're in it. But as I moved away and looked back, you appreciate sort of the isolation and the horror that's sort of inherent in small towns. I always think about it when I'm driving on a highway and I pass a little farm somewhere. Like, you have no idea what's going on inside. It could be Ed Gein in there. I mean, it's just, there's something inherently scary to me about small towns. And I grew up in one. So I mean, I have a sense of how realistic that can be. So I feel like, I remember seeing, even before Wicker Man, as a little kid, something like Children of the Corn really spoke to me. Like, I felt that kind of isolation, and especially, I was literally surrounded by cornfields. So that was probably actually my first interaction with what I would eventually know as folk horror. Wicker Man, of course, was a big one. I saw that late night TV when I was a kid. And the other big, I have a visual aid. The other big influence on me was this novel, Harvest Home by Thomas Tryon, which has this really great jacket. And this was a book that was, it's kind, I feel like in recent years, people have started talking about it again, but it really was a book that had fallen off the radar. But my mom had it in the house as a kid, and I was just sort of transfixed by the jacket. And you can kind of see a little bit of the autumnal in here, from Chris's art. You can kind of see like trees with faces, and I mean, even that, it's like a tree, but it's a hand with a scythe. And I found the jacket scary, and the way my mom described it was scary. And so that with the Wicker Man really put me in mind of this genre early. And then it became kind of a favorite. Movies like, 70s films like Blood on Satan's Claw, and then more recent stuff like A Field in England or Hagazusa, which is this German film that is just stunning. So it's to relate that to Kat and Sybil, they're sort of doing a reverse Daniel Kraus. I moved from the country to the city and to Chicago. And so I just took them in reverse. And I generally, my central relationship, and I don't know why this is the case, I tend to avoid romantic couples as a central, that I have them on the side sometimes. I don't know why. I think it's a reaction to seeing that so often, I think, in art. So my instinct is to go with, siblings or friends, or in this case, a mother and daughter. I find those, it just seems to be more fertile ground for me, a slightly less well-trod. And I don't know what it was about Kat and Sybil, but like the instant I started writing them, it made sense to me, their entire relationship, and that from that first scene, which Chris illustrates so perfectly. Like, you just love them. Like, she's sort of a terrible mom and the best mom all at once. And we regardless of our relationships with our own mom, we've certainly at least seen that in other people's mothers. We've seen someone who's the best and the worst all at once. And their child can really be screwed up by that, or they can sort of be a Sybil, and they can sort of, she's screwed up too. She has that whole Mistress Explosion Destroyer thing. So she's not getting out of this childhood unscathed, certainly. But she's picked up some survival mechanisms that do make her tougher. So I'll stop talking, but that's, but that's what led me to it. And I will say that because this is my first comic, watching those characters come to life in art has been a very interesting experience for me. I've never felt, and it sounds like a joke, but I've never felt as bad about what I've done to my characters as I have with the autumnal, because they've been created by someone who's not me suddenly. And I can see them at a distance, and I can see them from afar, and they feel like innocents to me in a way. And I can say, oh, I did that to you. Now I did that to something that's part of me. It's a different kind of experience.
Chris, what's it been like marching them slowly to the number 8, which we won't spoil for people, but what's that been like as a journey for you emotionally? Because I think this is the longest comic project you've worked on yet, correct?
Yeah, this is the longest thing I've done, and I got attached to the characters from the first issue. I draw them, for fun when I'm doodling. I really love them, and it's it sucks. I just they're great, and I love drawing them. I love. I feel like I've been getting to know them, and I just it's tough.
It is. For anyone who isn't already aware, the story follows Kat and Sybil as they, like Daniel said, move from Chicago to a small town in New England, Comfort Notch, and they begin to encounter strange happenings that all seem sort of centered around the leaves and something living in the woods, and a really wonderful sort of blend of nursery rhyme and town traditions kind of swirl together into this story of a witch in the woods. But the who that witch is and what that character means to the town changes shape multiple times. And as a kind of final piece before I hand things over to Alex for some cool stuff, I wanted to ask you, Daniel, about that facet of the story in particular. There's this rhyme that repeats, the children sing it, and then we learn more history about it. And at every kind of turn, it feels sort of like it's almost like a fairy tale, like a true fairy tale, where you kind of trace it back to its most sinister roots. And I wanted to just dig in a little bit on that because I find it so fascinating and enchanting, and I haven't really seen that handled before, especially not in a comic. So thought I would tee you up to talk about that.
I mean, that's an interesting question. I like the idea. I mean, my inspiration was less fairy tale, although it intentionally plays out with that tone, and more urban legend, the rural version of that. So rural legend, I guess. In my town that I grew up in Iowa, we had a rural legend of this man who lived beneath this train bridge who ate dogs, and I'm sure every little town has these weird kind of stories. It was called Dog Man, by the way, if you want to use that IP somewhere.
I think that one's taken.
Yeah, there's a dog.
Different. And I think it's a slightly different story.
Different story, right? But I really like the idea. It's not so much based on the concept of fake news, but I like this idea of the story through the years, people getting it wrong. And like you said, there's a nursery rhyme, and then at some point Kat learns that's not really the original lyrics to the rhyme. And a few times in the book it shifts like that, where people just aren't remembering things right, or they change them for certain reasons, the same way fairy tales were sort of sanitized over time from the original Grimm's version. And I like that. I like playing with that in art because it feels like usually when you have myths and creation stories, it's pretty firm. Like, this is how Batman got created or whatever. Yeah, I like in real life, it's more nebulous than that. It's like there's stories, but they don't necessarily match up. There's origins, but they're confused. And this allows, in a very natural way, this allows the story to twist and turn in a way that doesn't rely on tricks, really. It just relies on human failures of memory and emotion. And then eventually the truth does come out, and it's just allows you to sort of layer upon the tragedy and sadness of what's really happened over the years.
And I think that's, you know, thematically so vital to the story, because, you know, the impetus for Kat and Sybil's move is the inheritance of, you know, her mother's home. So this idea of inheriting more than just physical, you know, sort of belongings, but stories and the way they change, inheriting history. And in this case, you know, inheriting a witch as well is like I said, vital to the story. So looks like we're getting close to time, and I wanted to turn things over to Alex Scola, who has some pretty cool stuff to share. Before I say my, you know, like last part, I just want to remind everybody that the autumnal is available as a grab a galley. Please, you know, cross your fingers, hope you get it, go check it out. We're really excited for folks to be able to pick up that grab a galley. So just wanted to remind everyone of that. And Alex, you're up.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that little introduction. I'm Alex, and I do some digital marketing stuff with Vault. And I think one of the things that struck me when reading through the script for this story, we've touched on it a lot, is, you know, it's small towns are kind of sinister in that they, I feel like generally, I think also important context is I grew up in Las Vegas. So I grew up in a place where people aren't from. And I think when you are from a place where people aren't from, but they visit, a lot goes into the experience of the visitor, and a lot goes into sweeping things under the rug. And Comfort Notch as a place was so deep in both these traditions as well as just kind of a look and feel. And as Chris said, you know, just really wanting to underscore this slight sense of unease. So as part of one of the things that Syndee and I talked about when we were trying to figure out what would be really cool to do with this book is we built a little microsite for people who want to plan a trip to Comfort Notch. And I'm going to try to screen share this. Let's see how that working. Can everyone see the homepage here?
Yep, I can see it.
And you know, the intent is that obviously, you know, on its surface, it looks like any other trip planning website for any other destination. But obviously, as Comfort Notch is special, so too is the website. And as Daniel was talking about the unique challenge of constructing this story in a comic is a bit of a puzzle, so too is this website kind of a really deep and involved puzzle in a way. It really builds on the world and it builds on the story in a way that allows people to kind of engage and immerse into Comfort Notch. And the further you go into it, the more the shine will come off the apple. So it's definitely worth exploring. I don't want to go too deep into spoilers, but what I will give you is, since this is the debut of the website, you're going to need some passwords to get to places. And how about I give you the first one? So anyone can scan this QR, and I'll leave it up to you to figure out what to do with it, but it will get you to an interesting place, just as a jumping off point, as an entry into this whole experience we've crafted. There will also be some social media dialogue coming out natively from the Comfort Notch Visitors Bureau, as well as travelers, observers, and maybe some conspiracy theorists. So there's definitely a lot to keep an eye on there. And that's essentially the Comfort Notch Visitors Bureau website in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alex. I am extremely excited to try to to solve this puzzle, because I have no idea what's there. This is really fun for me. I get to be involved creatively in the in the comic, but I'm going to be a brand new visitor to Comfort Notch, and just as wide-eyed and bushy-tailed as anyone else. So please, to everybody watching, make sure you check out our US Book Show booth. Click around there, visit this and totally not creepy website, and use that QR code, and follow along on social media as well for all of the the cool stuff there. Thank you so much, Daniel, Chris, Alex. I really appreciate you guys joining us and taking time out of your day.